Well, welcome to the Apologetics.com radio show where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. I'm Harry Edwards, your host for this evening. It is, I can't believe it's already January 28th.
I know.
Right? Crazy. But still, Happy New Year to everyone. I guess this is our first live show with our group. And when I say our group, I'm looking at you, Lenny, and Jacob's not here. He's doing more important stuff, I guess, and he needs to be away. So we're going to miss him tonight. But anyways, Lenny, how was the holiday season for you?
It was nice. We had some rain. That's fine. We needed it around here.
Yeah.
But we had to get a nice time getting together with family and kind of just a calm Christmas and New Year's, which was appropriate. So
Good.
Yeah.
Now, I know I've been seeing a lot of your... are you on TikTok now? Is that what you're trying to do?
Well,
Okay.
not TikTok, but a lot of Instagram.
Like short...
Yeah, short reels and things like
there
that.
you
We're
go.
putting them on Facebook now,
Yeah.
just trying to push a lot more of these little snippets.
That's cool. That's
So-
great. Why don't you tell our listeners the ministry that you started many years ago, how it's doing, and what are some of your plans maybe this year?
Come Reason Ministries was one of the kind of the pioneering online apologetics organizations. Start off 1996.
All right.
We launched a website, Come Let Us Reason Together, taken from Isaiah 1:18, and launched our podcast in 2006. And so been writing, of course, lots of articles, done things of that nature, done some speaking. I was at the beginning of the year at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary at one of their conferences.
How was that, by the way?
That's an interesting conference. It's a great time because it's an entire week, and the speakers and the experts actually they kind of live with the attendees. So we all have meals together, things of that nature, and it's a pretty intensive set of week of.
Who are some of the speakers then?
You had this year you had Craig Hazen was there, Sam Alberry was there, Rob Bowman, Tim McGrew, of course, Robert Stewart, Lisa Fields, just a lot of kind of well-known names. James Walker, who actually brought an atheist friend with him, and they had a discussion online, which was pretty interesting.
Nice.
But a lot of folks with names that you'd recognize are there, and that was a great time. And then in March, we're doing a conference here in Southern California that I'm putting on called Dare to Defend. And you can find out more about that with daretodefend.com. J. Warner Wallace, Hugh Ross. We have Beckett Cook speaking with us. Craig Hazen's going to be out again. So there's a lot of really good topics.
The who's who in Christian apologetics.
Monique Dusan. And talking about some of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. On the shift in culture and critical theory and sexual liberation and all of those kinds of things. So that's available. That'll be March 10th and 11th.
Okay, just check it out on comereason.org.
Right.
All right, very good. Well, tonight is actually going to be pretty impactful. We are continuing our discussion on Truman's book, and it's The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And I would encourage you to pick it up if you haven't. Some of the who's who in Christian apologetics, and just anyone who knows and critiques culture today, they would recommend this book. In fact, Rod Dreher said this is without question one of the most important religious books of the decade. So that's really high praise coming from Rod Dreher, who also writes in this kind of like in this field. So that's really nice of him to say that. Ben Shapiro said this is the most important book of our moment. And I'm beginning to appreciate it and realize that I think those gentlemen are telling the truth here. chapter 7 is gold. This is really good. I think this is where it really, I think Truman does a masterful job of synthesizing the ideas of Marx and Freud. So this is the chapter where, after he's done a little bit of genealogy of ideas, beginning with Nietzsche, Marx, Darwin, now you come to, I think, the meat of this book. So I think
chapter 7 is the 20th century turn. It's where, and he had laid out in the early chapters with Philip Reif, where we had, if you remember, political man, and then religious man, and then
the psychological
economic man,
and then
and now this is where it all turns. And again, those first 3 types of individuals measured themselves and their self-identity against external reference. How do I compare to what the church expects a person to be? How do I compare to what a good citizen would be as a Roman citizen or as a Greek citizen, an Athenian or something to that? How do I measure myself against even the other industrialists and are the people who go to work every day and say, I'm, earning my bread, providing for my family? Those are all external reference. Now, all of a sudden, we see where it starts to invert, and your reference of yourself is how you feel, how you understand who you are.
It's very subjective.
It's subjective, and it's very internal. You're internally examining. So there's nobody out there to measure against. It's all about you.
You're right. And the interesting thing when it comes to worldviews, when the external no longer works in the mind of a person unaided by the Holy Spirit, all right, if there's nothing out there, there's no more enchantment,
right?
They don't find it out there, right. Then the next place to look is yourself. There's nowhere else.
Well, because that's the only thing, and one of the reasons why this becomes successful is because we live in an age that has done a couple of things. Marshall McLuhan makes a very pertinent point of, as the rise of media starts to dominate our understanding of the world, and the progenitors of that media become more sophisticated, where you're not just telling a story or reporting a story, you're making people feel it, you're making them experience it, right? Film immerses you now. And so your feelings become more important. Work becomes less critical in the sense that it's always going to be there. So you have the rise of affluence, you have the rise of technology, which makes work easier, not as dangerous. You're guaranteed 3 meals a day. You don't have to worry about that stuff. So your survival capabilities are taken care of. And now you can start thinking about, and the only thing that you actually do know is how you feel. That's the only thing that you can say, I know that this is how I feel.
Right.
And because media can take you places, and all of a sudden feelings become paramount and important. And I think some of the guys in the 20th century picked up on that fairly early, and that's why they said, we can take Freud, who made such a big splash, and we can use him to rescue our project of making, quote unquote, liberating all people from the drudgeries of the world, from the nihilistic self-existence that they're trying to capture.
Well, specifically also sexual repression.
Well, that's they use it through sexual repression, but they first of all see people as oppressed in general. Just and as we said, it started off Marxist, right? It started off, the oppressed were the people who were the have-nots. You had a very small number of people who lived very well. The land barons, the railroad tycoons, the oil magnates, and you had a whole lot of people who, in their eyes, were working a lot of hours and not getting a lot in return. Now, you still see that today. The reality is actually different. If you see a Jeff Bezos or a Elon Musk or these guys, they're not putting in 4 hours a day. They're putting in 12. They live their work, and which is why their relationships all suffer, because they're singularly obsessed with that conquering of whatever space they're in. But people assume that, oh, they've got it easy, I've got it hard, and I'm only getting nickels and they're getting, dollars. And so they saw that, and the 20th century Frankfurt guys, the Horkheimers of the world, wanted to say, how do we get this Marxism going so that we can make everybody equal, so that I can have as much equality as everybody else. Right. And the problem, of course, is that when you put Marxism in the real world, as the Soviet overthrow of the czars show, it actually kind of collapses in on itself, and it doesn't actually work in the real world. Right. And
we're seeing that right now.
It frustrated a lot of them. They're like, well, what can we do? Because it should have been, I mean, Marx made it sound so plausible that economically it's going to happen. The proletariat is going to revolt against those bourgeois guys who have all the money and have all the control, and we want the control, and we want to have it all shared equally. And the problem was it wasn't happening.
That didn't happen at all.
So they said, well, it must be then not economics that's the driver. It must be psychology that's the driver. Specifically, the most repressive aspect of psychology is sexual, because that's what Freud said. Freud said it's our sex that's repressed, and therefore that's the lever that we can get, because if there's something that pulls people more than money for most folks, it's sexual desire.
Right. It's stronger than materialism, according to some of these thinkers. So thanks for setting that up, Lenny. Wonderful, just weaving all the ideas together and through history. Now, you were mentioning how Marx thought that perhaps this journey to utopia would happen through communism, but it failed. And just going to Truman's work here, he noted that for Marx's theory to work, that two things had to happen. Capitalism had to fail under its own weight, and second is the working class to develop a political system that justifies the wrong assumption that both the working and the middle class possess values that work against each other. That really didn't happen. They were working together, not against each other. So we know that capitalism did not fail, and it had a chance to fail in 1929 when the stock market crashed, and which led to the Great Depression. And yet America survived that and even thrived.
And Germany, which was probably the worst hit in the world depressed movement, because they were the conquered of World War I. And they were embittered by the fact that they lost, as well as they had to try and rebuild their
economy,
their entire economy, as they were decimated from the war.
Right.
And so instead of turning to communism, they turned to fascism.
Right. Which that didn't work either.
No, ultimately no, because you got one totalitarian guy coming. But what's interesting in that is, if Marx was right, then we have Russia that has, again, the czars living the high life. There's a small bourgeois contingent that holds all of the power, all the landowners, much like the Middle Ages, where you have the lords controlling all the land and then the serfs kind of working it. Russia's kind of still in that state, and you would have expected there that the workers would rise up, revolt, and take control of everything. That was Marx's theory.
Right.
It didn't happen in Germany. It didn't happen in the Soviet Union or Russia at that time. Right. So in the real world, all of a sudden, Marx's theory isn't playing out the way Marx said it would play out.
Right,
And this bothered some people. This
It did.
bothered the communists in the 1930s,
Right.
especially after Lenin. When Stalin comes into power,
Right.
he's even worse than Lenin.
Right.
I mean, it's not just a temporary dictatorship of the proletariat. It's like a heavier hand.
Right, right.
And they're like, what went wrong?
Yeah. Well, which led to, again, this Italian thinker, Antonio Gramsci, just picking up the pieces of failed Marxism. And you were mentioning that he wrote a lot of this stuff in prison.
And again, Gramsci's writing when Benito Mussolini
Yeah,
is coming
yes.
into power. And this is why Gramsci's in prison, because Mussolini is another fascist.
That's right.
Doesn't want communism.
This is an apology for cultural apologetics, right? So he was smart enough to realize that it failed miserably. So again, in the journey and race toward utopia, thinking that Marx had the solution, but maybe the application of it was all wrong. You're not appealing to a class division. Capitalism is not going to fail. So perhaps it's through the cultural institutions like schools and media now that they have to embed themselves.
Yeah, what Gramsci's view was, and he talks about hegemonic power. He's the one who coins that term, hegemonic.
Right, okay.
What he says basically is two things. He says, first of all, the intelligentsia isn't separate from the people.
Right.
They're
He doesn't want to create another class.
he doesn't.
Right?
He doesn't want to have the intelligentsia. He wants the intelligentsia to be considered part of the people, but the part of the people that have insight and understanding. And the problem is the rest of the people have been so blinded by the lies and the assumptions that have been fed to them that they can't see what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to. So theoretically, in the Wall Street crash, capitalism did fail. Everybody lost all their money. And to the minds of these communists, they're saying, well, see, this is the failure where you say everything's going to get better, everything's going up. Now everybody's down and starving again. This is a failure of capitalism. Even modern day communists will say these kinds of things. And they said, but the problem was the class society that should then overthrow these owners didn't know that that was their role. And so the intelligentsia has to come in and set it up for them so that they understand that. So how do we do this? Well, we don't do it through symposia. We do it through the cultural avenues that the lower class most inhabit.
Right.
So the public schools, the movies, and
Fashion.
Shelley and
Sure.
Percy and all the guys, the romantics that we read about, Wordsworth and these guys, they held the same idea. And in their era, in the early 19th century, it was poetry. Now it's radio, story, film, getting into the colleges to instruct the instructors, to give. So if we sell the educated class this idea, then they're going to go out and they're going to start running the schools and teach the children, and then they can perpetuate this idea.
And a lot of that thinking kind of resulted in the formation of the Frankfurt School, where a bunch of these thinkers, a lot of them German thinkers during that time, they just wanted to take down these institutions that apparently are keeping the oppressors in power, in their privileged positions. And so out of the Frankfurt School comes critical theory. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about CRT, critical race theory, and everybody seems to have an opinion about it. But we want to highlight, I know, Lenny, you made it very clear that really there's a whole subcategories, and CRT is just one of them.
Yes.
But critical theory, actually, again, coming out of the Frankfurt School, has a lot of, I want to say, damnable qualities, really. Like you were saying, not any of those were based in data or fact. A lot of them were just musings by these social theorists, right? So, in fact, I was just thinking here, and maybe I can add to CRT, maybe critical sex theory. I wonder if that
Queer theory would be considered.
Is that what it is?
Queer,
It's queer theory.
queer
now.
theory.
Okay.
So you have queer theory, you have feminist theory, you have race theory.
So would you say queer theory is really what Chapter 7 is all about? Kind of
Partially.
like a sexual revolution? Okay.
Queer theory as a subset, as an actual academic discipline, doesn't really come into the fore until, say, the 1980s, late 1980s, late 1990s.
It's a fairly
because
new field.
homosexuality, for the most part, is still viscerally reacted against by the general public in the 70s. It's not, I mean, you start to see some films coming out and things like that, but for most people, they wouldn't accept that. All critical theory, though, is based on two assumptions, to your point. So the first is that the world can be divided up into two classes of people. There's the oppressors and there's the oppressed. Right. You're in one of those two classes. And secondly, the dominant narrative, especially in the West, is built so that it's not necessarily a true narrative. It's just, again, this is the postmodern portion of it. Yeah. It's built to keep the oppressors in control.
In power, right.
And so everything else comes out of that. And that's why you're to be critical of all of these ideas that you consider normal. That you could, the nuclear family, or that you should be a good citizen and pay your taxes and not question the laws or things of that nature. All of this comes out. You should question even your meta narrative, right? The what is the big view of life? Well, there is no one big view of life. You're the ultimate arbiter of that.
Right.
So that's it. All of this is under question. Because it's part of the tools that the oppressors use to keep you oppressed.
That's the terrible outcome of the Frankfurt School. Like you said, everything is in question. Now, I want to say, to their credit, some things have to be questioned.
Sure, absolutely.
But they absolutized everything, and literally nothing was spared.
And there is no answer. That the problem is when you're going to be critical, when you're going to critique something, usually you have to have a standard against which to critique it. They're critiquing everything, but there is no standard. And one of the key points that those who argue against critical theory make is there is no vision for what a just society looks like. There is no vision for how we know we're progressing out of this hegemonic bifurcation. There is no way for us. All we know is today is bad, and that's what you'll hear all the time. White supremacy and this is well. What does it look like when it's not?
Right.
What does the perfect society look like? And they don't offer that power. So there's no standard against which we can critique anything except to say everything that you believe, everything that's considered appropriate in normal discourse today is null and void.
You and I talked before the show started that we would ask for callers.
Yeah.
So I'll put out the number there, and I know we're heading to a break pretty soon, but if you are a teacher or a parent, maybe you're involved in the PTA, and you're wondering why there's so much sex education, you might want to give us a call, and maybe we can help you understand why culture is heading that way, or is the way it is right now. Again, Chapter 7 is the new left and the politicization of sex. That's Chapter 7 of Truman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And in the book, he's trying to help us understand why all of a sudden politics and sex are just almost inseparable. And it seems like sex is in the driver's seat right now. So almost anything that's legislated, what gets on the top has something to do with LGBT, homosexuality, transgenderism, all of these things. It's because Chapter 7, Truman does a good job of identifying the marriage between Marx and Freud. And maybe you can do a little quick teaser, Lenny. A lot of our talks nowadays is blaming everything on Marxism. But you had a good insight. You said, why isn't anybody mentioning Freud?
Why are we not critiquing Freud with critical theory? Because it's at least as much dependent upon Freud as it is upon Marx. And the sexual repression, the sexual identity piece, the psychological inward turn is what is supposed to be repressive. But nobody says, hey, that Freudian stuff, we don't buy any of that.
We'll talk more about that after the break. We're discussing Chapter 7 of Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. We'll be right back after a few messages.
All right, let's get back to the Apologetics.com radio show.
Well, welcome back to the second half hour of the Apologetics.com radio show. I'm Harry Edwards, your host for this evening. It is January 28th, and Happy New Year to everyone that's listening. And Lenny is my special guest for this evening. We don't have Jacob tonight as he's just busy with other important church work, so that's good. He'll be back next month, though. But we put out a number out there. You can give us a call right now. The number is 888-995-5552. If you want to join our discussion. Again, we tried to set up the whole idea of why a lot of these, why sex seems to be prominent in culture today. And when I say sex in general, we're talking about transgenderism, LGBT, homosexual issues.
Well, even in heterosexual aspects,
Yes.
The idea that if you're a virgin, you might be mocked for it. How strange. Not even, necessarily made fun of, but why would you be a virgin? So sex becomes a central aspect of self-identity, and we see it in our advertisements. We see it in our sitcoms, right? We always, even the like I said, the lovable Lothario, the Joey Tribbianis or the Barry Stinsons that play out in our they're oh, that's okay, they're abusing thousands of women on the TV show, but we still love them because they have a heart of gold. Well, maybe the fact that they're abusing all of these women shows that they don't have a heart of gold.
Right. So it's the new left that really is trying to take down all of these institutions, and one of the biggest would be our current sexual mores or norm. Yeah. Freud had this idea to have a civil society. You need to repress some of these desires.
Yeah, he said that we had two principles. The pleasure principle, which was innate in all of us. We have desires. We naturally drive towards sex because we are sexual beings. So Freud was the first one who says, we're going to put sex in the absolute center of our identity. You have the id, the ego, and the superego, and all of this stuff. But there's an unconscious desire, even from our earliest formation as an infant, where we're in the oral phase, right? Where we're looking for that satisfaction is actually a sexual satisfaction. And then he says, but we can't be freewheeling sexual beings all the time because anarchy would break out. People would be raping each other, taking people off the street, right? That's not civil.
Right.
So we have to repress that. So we have the repression principle.
Right.
And these two sit in tension with one another, and they can't be resolved. That was Freud's thought, that you can't have that society.
Enter, again, Frankfurt School, and Marcuse's thought on this. Herbert Marcuse was a sociologist, right, in the mid-20th century. And he was a professor. And he had this idea. His thoughts were a little bit nuanced. That's why it seemed so convincing. And he was saying that Freud, borrowing from Freud, and a little critique from Freud, saying that he didn't go far enough because perhaps Freud was just stuck in this historical moment. And so Marcuse and the other Frankfurt School folks thought that perhaps if you just take Freud's ideas, take it out of history, perhaps it might apply today. So perhaps instead of having sex being repressed, perhaps really what you need is to liberate it so that you fulfill your true self. And so that's what we have now. From this crazy idea, you have all of these other sexual deviant ideas flow from it, and we can just go down the list here. But let's talk about feminism. What the difference perhaps between the first wave feminist and the second wave feminists?
Well, yes.
That flows from here. Feminism flows from this
So in
idea.
the Frankfurt School, the first guy to kind of do this, to say, what Marx got wrong was it isn't the kings and the peasants, and then the nobles and the serfs, and then the owners, and right. Marx saw everything in capitalist economic terms,
right.
and he says that those classes are getting closer and closer together. And Wilhelm Reich from the Frankfurt School says it's not capitalism that drives people, it's their sexual, and actually sex is getting a little bit freer and a little bit freer as society. So we need to look at the advent of history sexually as opposed to merely economically, and one will follow the other.
Right.
That was their idea, that the two work in tandem. And Marcuse takes this and says, yeah, but let's expand on it. And he believed, unlike Freud, he thinks Freud's wrong in the fact that if you unleash full sexual liberty, even for children, because Reich would go so far, and he was hesitant.
Right.
And pedophilia was a problem for him.
That's
right. But it was an inconsistency in his.
That's right.
In his
because one can always say, hey, it's wrong for your time, but could there be another time where it might be right?
Right.
But he just avoided that issue.
Yes, exactly. But Marcuse jumps in and says, no, there's going to be a time where it would be strange to have people say, well, I'm not going to teach my child about masturbation yet.
Right.
And he's, what? How could that be? Why would you do that?
Right. And in combining that with Marx, again, bringing in the state, he would say that would be unlawful to prohibit that.
Yes, yep. Exactly. So Marcuse comes and jumps in and says, the problem is that there are consequences to sex.
Right.
And, of course, one of the main functions that sexual activity does is produce children. Well, this has different outcomes depending on whether you're male or female. And he recognized that. And he said, well, there's got to be some way of equalizing the scales, because women will always suffer a larger burden of the results of sexual liberation because they're going to get pregnant.
Right.
Which changes the dynamic, and now that keeps men in power.
So this feminism now is part of the second wave.
Yeah. So the first wave of feminism was, hey, treat us as thinking individuals, Susan B. Anthony, where we can weigh the consequences of political discourse, where we can weigh the consequences of our eventual desires for liberty, for governance, and we can be contributing partners even economically if we so desire. We can go to work. World War II happens, of course, and it shows that women can jump into mechanized 20th century assembly line or whatever the work is required, because all the men were off the war, so the women were left to do it. And that kind of answers some of that question. And then the next push is, well, wait a minute, how do we then equalize the sexual playing field? And it starts to say, well, we have to do something about this idea of linking biology and sex with the outcomes of biologic, that women have to be the baby bearers. Women can't have sex like the men. And I've always thought it odd that even today, feminists tend to measure their success and their equality using the man's playbook.
Yeah, that's true.
Because most women, it's not like, how many sexual partners can I get, right? That's not how women think. That's just not how they're wired.
Right.
And it's strange that they consider that the form of achievement that they're going for
Right, right.
You know, that doesn't mean equality.
Well, I wanted to mention this. Truman writes about this woman who was a lover of Sartre, I believe, de Beauvoir.
Yeah, Simone de Beauvoir. Yeah.
Yes.
The Second Sex was the book that she put out.
That's right. That's right. So she started sort of writing in this second wave sense of feminism, but a particular feminist named Shulamith Firestone, I thought she outlined the feminist agenda pretty well, and I'm summarizing here, but there's about 6 in this agenda of the second wave feminists, and I want to talk a little bit about this because it is kind of scary. It is kind of scary, and at the same time prophetic. And so, as Christian apologists, how do we deal with this? All right, so we want to get to that, but the first one is the distinction between gender is eliminated in this second wave feminist thinking. And we kind of see that, right? You were mentioning that it was Firestone that made the distinction between gender and sex, right?
Yeah. Well,
so sex is biology, but
right.
then gender is what you feel about your sex.
Is your role
is
that
your
you
role.
take on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
de Beauvoir, I think, starts that process.
Right. All right. Okay. We see that happening now. Again, a lot of this writing was in the early 20th century.
Yeah, Firestone wrote actually in 1970. She takes de Beauvoir's writing and extends it.
Got it. Okay. Number 2, heterosex is replaced with polymorphous pansexuality, and that's just a sophisticated term that means anything goes.
Anything goes.
Anything goes.
Any type of coupling or throupling that you so
whatever.
desire.
Even
if women are going to be equal, we can do.
Yes.
Whatever.
I know. So that is, we'll talk more about that later. Number 3, reproduction is accomplished through technology and would be available to both men and women. So like you were saying, Lenny, how pregnancy kind of burdens the woman. Well, if women want to be free of that, well, there you go. You can be free of that through technology. You have artificial wombs. Now, you were mentioning how some company is developing.
Well, no, there's a futurist who just put out a very kind of famous video, Hashem Al-Ghali, and he put out this video to show about creating basically baby making factories, making where we can birth up to 30,000 babies through artificial wombs. Why would you want to be pregnant? Because it slows you down for 9 months of your life, and you have to have the morning sickness, and then you have to go through the pain of childbirth. And you with all of that, that's so much noise. And these biofactories will take all of the distasteful aspects of reproduction away, and we can have these babies here. And it's an 8-minute video that's actually pretty shocking and disturbing in its value. Now, if you've ever read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, this is how Brave New World also starts. With the baby factories. And matter of fact, the people who have babies naturally, they're considered the savages. Right? And what the civilized people do is they anesthetize themselves through sex and through soma, which is the drug of the day. And that's, they're all programmed to say, this is my role, and we're all serving the greater society, and there's no more war, and we're all happy because we all are automatons, basically.
Right, pretty much. And you're anesthetized,
too.
Yeah, sure. Well, the fourth agenda here of the second wave feminists is the role of mother is abolished. So that makes sense. That kind of follows from number 3.
Yeah, because you don't want she has more work to do than daddy. Right. And again, this is such
even more worth.
This is such a superficial way to understand parenting. I could easily craft a narrative that says, look, the most valuable people that we have is the next generation. Therefore, the best people that we can possibly find should be the ones who are rearing and developing those emotional relationships with the next generation. Right. And the guy who we schlep off to do some menial job just so he can get a few bucks to eat, that's called a servant. So I can easily provide a narrative that shows why motherhood is the ultimate high calling, why it is important to have the best people be the mothers and not the going off to work and doing whatever,
Right.
But that's not how our culture narrates this position. They say motherhood is the drudgery.
Right.
It's, well, you want to have a career first, don't you?
Right.
I mean, you have to have self-fulfillment. Maybe self-fulfillment happens when you're fulfilling the needs of others,
Right.
which is what Jesus taught us.
Or what you were created to be.
Right.
Yeah. The fifth one is difference in strength between children and adults is eliminated by cultural means. And I was mentioning this. Now, I don't have data to speak of, but I know in this culture right now, we have ways where children can be emancipated from their parents if they just go to the judge and say, hey, judge, my parents are XYZ. And then based on that, parents can be, or, they can be separated as families.
Oh, yeah. Or more applicably, since January 1st, new law came into California. If you're, say, living in Texas, and Texas does not allow minors to undergo gender transition surgery, you can come to California, and California says the state can override the parent's desires for the destiny of the child. That the state knows, even though the child is fleeing to California, coming to California with no prior background, the state knows better than the parents what's good for that child.
Right. Yeah.
And
that is scary.
that's a law that's on the books today.
Today, it passed. Yeah, you're right. My goodness, what are we coming to here? But the sixth and final agenda of the second wave feminists is technology replaces human work.
Yeah.
So everything's just automated because we can't be burdened by work.
Yeah, this is the very Star Trek vibe, right? We just explore space for the exploration of space. We've got replicators. We don't need to actually do anything. Except, of course, when the warp core breaks down or something like that, then everybody's doing something. But that's the fiction that makes it sound so good.
And a lot of what I just read is happening already. Now, this was written, like I said, 50, 60 years ago. Yeah. And a lot of the technology that is rampant today was not even conceived back then.
No, and it's amazing.
It is.
That how prescient those guys were in seeing these kinds of things.
Well, I'm wondering, again, Truman doesn't really tackle this, but Lenny and I have been just sitting here just wondering, what does a mature Christian do in light of all of this? So we know that culture, the West right now, is embroiled in this sexual revolution, and it's done in a sneaky way.
Yeah,
it's not some revolution with arms. There are no bombs going off. And again, if we are to trust maybe the methods of the Frankfurt School, I believe they're successful today, no doubt. Now, it didn't take on right away in the 60s, but it's always been kind of there. And it finally is manifesting in crazy ways right now, where we don't even bat an eye if we talk about LGBT issues. It's just, if we see a rainbow, we say, oh, that's just normal now.
Yeah.
So our kids are growing up with sexual norms kind of like in chaos right now.
Right.
So what do we do? So a lot of this, we were mentioning, Lenny, you and I, that a lot of this has to do with our identity, really, and the quest for meaning and significance. So if you can't find it in a class, you keep searching, eventually you just find it in yourself. You architect whatever you want to be, including your gender, including your sex, and we end up harming ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
But what is the Christian response, and what's the biblical response to this in the next 6 minutes that we have?
Well, here's the first thing that I think is very interesting. If you look at all of this, what you see is a desire for individuals to reverse the consequences of the first sin. So let's go back all the way to Genesis 3. Okay? There were certain aspects put in place. God gave man dominion over the animals, over the earth. God gave man a wife and said she will be his helpmate. And he told them they can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Right.
Now, Adam does the exact opposite of all those things. Eve listens to the snake instead of having dominion over the created order. The created order tells her what to do. She fails in the sense of not listening to God's law and entices her husband as opposed to him leading her. She leads him. And God presents a curse on them. He would be cursed with the work of the field. From sweat will come his brow. Her curse is to have children in pain, childbirth and labor. And she will desire to overrule her husband, but he will dominate her.
Right.
And in all of these things, what you see the Marxists, the critical theorists, trying to do is undo each one of these curses. They don't want to work from the sweat of their brow. They don't want to have the childbirth pain, right? They want to eliminate the distinctions between man and woman so that there is no dominance.
Roles are confused, right?
They want to eliminate the natural order even of childbirth itself so that you can be a woman and not have a uterus.
Eliminate the hierarchy too.
It's literally an attempt to undermine God's order, and I think God put that order there not necessarily only as a punishment, but as a consequence. And there's a difference, right? There's a difference between saying, so for example, a punishment, if you tell your children, okay, look, I'm going to give you a credit card for college. You're to spend only $100 a month on it or something like that. And I'll send you the $100 and we'll pay the $100 bill. Okay, you can do that. Now there's if your child violates that and spends more, then you can say, well, there's a punishment that I can give you in that I'm not going to maybe pay the $100, but there's also a consequence in that you got now $300 or $400 or $500 in debt that you have to somehow work back. That's not necessarily a punishment. It's just like you put yourself in a bad situation and now you got to dig yourself out of it. Yeah. And I think that that's part of the process. God tries to prevent Adam and Eve from going further into sin by kind of putting some of these guardrails up. And that's exactly what these guys are trying to undo. And what I find is when we stick as close as we can to God's order, we tend to be happier. This is why we're seeing depression rates raise astronomically in Western countries. The countries that are the most egalitarian, Sweden and some of the Nordic countries, tend to actually have the most reinforced gender roles. Sociologists are like, why is this? You would think that the sexes would blend together. No, they actually tend to separate. The people who are happiest are living more traditional, quote unquote, roles because what you find is it's not about you. It's about others.
Right.
How many women do you know who can't get pregnant, who are desperate to feel that? Yeah. I mean, to take that away and say that's a burden, that's ridiculous. Yeah. How many men do you know who are depressed because they feel like a failure because they can't support their family, they don't have a good job, they know that they're sitting around just playing video games all day, so they have no self-worth. Right. So in all of these things, if we look at what the model is that God provides, then what we'll find, and if we're working not simply for ourselves, but working because there's this other person here who I need to provide for, there's value in that. And that's what I've seen over and over again is the idea of Jesus saying, love your neighbor. He who is the greatest is the servant of all. Yeah. And if you're serving your children, what's best for them? If you're serving your wife, if you're serving your husband, if you're serving your community, not, hey, my community should be doing for me. They should be paying me reparations or something. But what can I do to benefit the community? If you turn that script around, I think that's when we start to find true meaning and true satisfaction in life.
Right. Well said, Lenny. So really, a lot of our issues can be solved by looking to Scripture and see that God has the perfect plan for us. He created us. He knows us. And just like you were mentioning, in a parent-child relationship, many times the child does not know the end from the beginning.
Yeah.
The parent, on the other hand, sees it all. They've experienced it. They love their child. They know what's good for the child. And so in many ways, we're like children, right? We're grasping in the dark. We don't know. And yet our Heavenly Father, who loves us, has given us guidelines, has given us rules, because we will tend to stray. And if we don't have these rules, we will, like you were saying, we will suffer the consequences, and there will be punishment. I like what you did with just how a Marxist / Freudian view seeks to undo all of the consequences and the punishment of sin. But again, in a gospel-centered idea, it's Christ that actually can take away the punishment and sin, because he is God. And that's really the message of the gospel. I know I've encountered some dear friends who somehow can't get away from all of the injustices and all of the inequity, but it's just bigger than us, and really we live in a fallen world. So I guess my appeal to my brothers and sisters and our friends is look to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look to Jesus, because he has the power to forgive, and he forgives you and loves you. Well, you've been listening to Apologetics.com radio, where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. Our hope is that you've learned some aspect about the Christian worldview that strengthens your faith and make you want to learn more. We need to make Christianity attractive, as Pascal would say. So special thanks to my one and only panel, Lenny, this evening, and to the behind-the-scenes sound engineer, Remy and Colin. Thanks, guys, for making us sound good, making sure the mics work. And special thank you to our listeners. Until next time, good night.